In 1993, legendary director Steven Spielberg released two groundbreaking films which could not have been more different from one another. The first was Jurassic Park, a thrilling summer blockbuster and special effects landmark about bringing dinosaurs back from extinction, horrible grandfathers, and Newman's side gig. The other was Schindler's List. Widely considered one of the most heart-wrenching films ever made, Schindler's List tells the true story of Oskar Schindler, a German industrialist who, through his enamelware and ammunition factories in occupied Poland and Czechoslovakia, succeeded in saving over 1,000 Jewish workers' lives. Thanks to Spielberg's film, Schindler is today perhaps the best known of the so-called righteous among the nations, individuals recognized by the Yad Vashem Memorial Institution for assisting Jews and other victims of the Holocaust. But Schindler was far from alone, and his story bears striking resemblance to that of another, more obscure figure, a fellow German businessman named Otto Weidt. This is the story of Nazi Germany's forgotten other Oskar Schindler. Otto Max August Weidt was born on May 2, 1883 in Rostock, Mecklenburg to working-class wallpaper hanger Max Weidt and his wife Augusta. In 1888, the Weidt family moved to Berlin, where Otto completed his schooling and joined his father's business as a painter and gilder. While traveling around Germany, Weidt became interested in the political philosophy of anarchism, making initial contact with anarchist groups in Hamburg. Upon returning home to Berlin in 1903, Weidt became increasingly involved in the movement, even becoming an editor for the newspaper Der Anarchist. Naturally, anarchism, like all radical movements, was viewed with suspicion by the German imperial state, and Weidt soon came under observation by the political police, who arrested and imprisoned him several times, including in 1907 for allegedly being in contact with a Russian anarchist circle. As a result of the persecution, Weidt left the organized anarchist movement in 1910. However, he remained an individualist anarchist throughout his life, strongly opposing centralized government and war. Fast forward to 1913, Weidt married Martha Kaniskny, with whom he had two sons. The following year, the Great War broke out, but the strongly pacifist Weidt managed to avoid frontline military service due to an ear infection, instead serving as a nurse in a field hospital in Custrum. Meanwhile, his marriage to Martha quickly soured and they divorced in 1916. After the war, Weidt returned to his former occupation, but in 1936 he decided to go into business for himself and established a decorating and furniture factory in Berlin. That same year, he met and married 34-year-old Elsa Nast, the eldest daughter of a paver and factory worker who had had to support her struggling family from an early age by working in a clothing store. Their marriage would be a long and happy one, with Elsa playing a vital role in Otto's heroic wartime activities. However, disaster soon struck as the decorating and furniture business failed, while simultaneously Otto began losing his eyesight. Not to be kept down long, however, he taught himself the craft of brush making and broom binding, and in 1939, along with business partner Gustav Kremet, established a brush and broom factory in Berlin, a short walk from his and Elsa's apartment. A committed anti-Nazi, Weidt employed almost exclusively blind, deaf, and mute Jews assigned to him from the Jewish Home for the Blind in Berlin. By now almost completely blind, moved his factory to a larger premises to accommodate up to 35 employees. As one of his clients was the German army, Weidt's factory was classified as important for the war effort. This special status was to prove vital, for on January 20th, 1942, the infamous Wannsee Conference laid the groundwork for the final solution to the Jewish question. Soon after, the Nazis began rounding up Jews and other so-called undesirables and deporting them to labor and death camps in the East. The moment the deportations began, Weidt sprang into action, using every method at his disposal to protect his employees. At first, like Oskar Schindler, he fought endlessly with the Gestapo officers over the fate of every single worker, arguing that they were essential for completing key orders for the army. When this did not work, he turned to bribery and obtaining false documents. The latter was particularly vital for protecting Weidt's non-disabled employees, such as Inga Deutschkrang, Alice Licht, Erich Frey, and Chaim and Max Horn. These individuals came in Weidt's employ by a variety of routes. For example, both Alice Licht and Inga Deutschkrang were conscripted into forced labor at an artificial silk factory operated by chemical giant IG Farben. Both managed to get dismissed from their jobs by feigning injuries, like a stomach ulcer and Deutschkrang a twisted knee, and sought advice from the local Jewish community councils, who suggested they apply at Weidt's broom and brush factory. As neither one was disabled, Weidt was only able to hire them by bribing Alfred Eichhaus, head of the deployment section for Jews at Berlin's labor office. He then obtained for Deutschkrang an Aryan work permit, which he acquired from a local prostitute. Unfortunately, the permit had to be discarded just 3 months later when said prostitute was arrested by the Berlin police. Other documents were forged by associate Theodor Gorner, who ran a printing press and also employed several Jewish people living in hiding. As the Gestapo conducted regular inspections of Weidt's factory, he installed an alarm system to warn his non-disabled employees of incoming raids and built an area under the staircase where they could hide. When bribery, forgery, and bureaucratic wrangling did not work, Weidt resorted to hiding employees in a number of safe houses scattered throughout Berlin. In this, he was assisted by a large network of Confederates, including his wife Elsa, business partner Gustav Kenmert, and former sex worker and broom factory employee Hedwig Porschitz, who in all purchased food and other supplies on the black market. On the side, Porschitz also hid 4 Jewish women in her apartment. Meanwhile, factory advertising agent Karl Deibel and building superintendent Emma Trossler hid 10 Jews at the former broom and brush factory premises and employed several illegally in Trossler's laundry business. Electrician Werner Scharf delivered aid to Jews imprisoned at a deportation assembly camp. Jewish doctor Gustav Held and his wife Inga provided medical services to Jews in hiding and sheltered several people in their home, while former engineer Hans Rosenthal, who worked for the Jewish Community Supplies and Purchasing Department, secretly supplied food and provided warnings of upcoming Gestapo actions against German workers. More unexpected allies were found among the members of Berlin's 16th Police Precinct, including Chief Wilhelm Creutzfeldt, head of the registration office Willy Struck, and Officer Otto Belgart. Strongly opposed to the Nazi government during the Night of the Broken Glass pogrom of November 9, 1938, the 16th Precinct had prevented the burning of a synagogue, arguing that it was a historically protected monument and calling in the fire brigade to douse the flames. Throughout the Second World War, the precinct continued to quietly oppose the state persecution of the Jews, stamping forged identity documents for Otto Weidt's employees and other Jews in hiding, and warning people in their district of upcoming roundups and deportations. Other safe houses in Weidt's network included one where he rented storage space for the broom and brush factory, and in whose basement the Licht family were hidden, and the factory building itself, where in 1943 Chaim and Max Horn and Eric and Elizabeth Frey lived in a windowless basement room. These were but a few of some 7,000 Jews who escaped deportation by going underground in Berlin. But as the tide of the war began to turn against Germany and the Holocaust continued to ramp up, Weidt was forced to resort to increasingly desperate measures to save his employees from deportation and extermination. In early 1943, Hans Rosenthal warned Weidt of an upcoming mass roundup of Jewish factory workers scheduled for February the 27th. But while Weidt kept his factory closed that day, several of his employees were still caught in the Gestapo dragnet, including his secretary, Alice Licht, and her parents, Kathy and George. The some 10,000 Jewish workers arrested during this were temporarily incarcerated in a series of assembly camps across Berlin, including in Rosenstrasse. This location soon became the site of one of the most extraordinary events in the history of the Third Reich, the Rosenstrasse protest, in which a month of concerted demonstrations by hundreds of Berlin women succeeded in pressuring the Nazi government into releasing 1,800 Jewish detainees. Meanwhile, Otto Weidt was not idle, traveling to the camps where, thanks to some last-minute haggling with the authorities, he succeeded in securing the release of several of his employees, including Alice Licht, Inga Deutschkron, and Hans Israelowitsch. However, he failed to save Light's parents, who were deported to the Theresienstadt ghetto in Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. As covered in our previous video, what did the German public know about the Holocaust during World War II, Theresienstadt was a transit camp for prisoners bound to labor and extermination camps in the East, including Auschwitz. Billed by Nazi propaganda as a retirement settlement for evacuated Jews, the facility is perhaps most infamous for a carefully orchestrated visit by a Red Cross delegation in June of 1943, for which the buildings were cleaned up and delegation members presented with soccer games, children's opera performances, and other cultural activities meant to disguise the horrific conditions inside the ghetto. Despite being saved from deportation, Alice chose to travel to Theresienstadt to take care of her parents. While there, they were supported by 150 care packages sent by Otto Weidt himself. Inmates at Theresienstadt were allowed to write a limited number of heavily censored postcards to family and friends, and in this manner, Alice managed to inform Weidt of her impending transfer to Auschwitz. Weidt immediately traveled to Auschwitz under the guise of selling his brooms and brushes to the camp staff. There he discovered that Alice had been transferred to the labor camp and ammunition factory at Christianstadt, a sub-camp of the Gross-Rosen concentration camp. Through a Polish worker, Weidt informed Alice that he had deposited civilian clothes, money, and medicine at a nearby boarding house and returned to Berlin. In late January of 1945, as the Soviet Red Army closed in on Nazi-occupied Poland, Kristianstad was evacuated and its workers led on a death march south. Alice, however, managed to slip away, retrieving the aid package and made her way back to Berlin, where she lived in hiding with Otto and Elsie Weidt for the remainder of the war. Her parents, however, were not so lucky and were soon murdered in the gas chambers at Auschwitz. As the war waged on, the noose continued to tighten around Berlin's Jews, thousands of whom continued to be rounded up by the Gestapo. These included Weidt's employees Chaim, Machla, Max, and Ruth Horn, arrested at the Broom and Brush Factory storage facility in October of 1943, and Eric and Elsbeth Frey, who were arrested at their factory hiding place in May of 1944. All 6 were deported to Auschwitz and murdered. As you might imagine, in the wake of the Horn family's arrest in his factory, Otto Weidt was interrogated by the Gestapo. However, he escaped formal punishment, likely thanks to extensive bribes he had paid over the years. Other members of the Weidt's underground network also fell afoul of the Gestapo. Print shop owner Theodor Gorner was arrested and interrogated in the summer of 1944, but as his business was also classified as important for the war effort, he was released after agreeing to pay 5,000 Reichsmarks to the National Socialist People's Welfare Annual Winter Relief Fund. Despite this close call, Gorner continued to support Jews in hiding until the end of the war. Advertising agent Carl Deibel, forced to go underground himself, was arrested in July of 1944. Yet despite months of torture, he refused to betray the rest of the network and was released in October of that year. Thanks to his position in the Jewish community's supplies and purchasing department, Hans Rosenthal managed to defer his and his mother Kathy's deportation until June of 1943, when they were finally arrested and imprisoned. However, the German government surrendered to the Allies before they could be deported, and both survived the war. Meanwhile, the prostitute Hedwig Portius was arrested in 1944, convicted of war economy crimes and receiving and selling stolen goods, and sentenced to forced labor, serving in a labor camp from November of 1944 until the end of the war. And despite injuries which had previously exempted him from military service, Gustav Kremet was drafted into the army in November of 1942 and served in non-combat roles until the end of the war, returning to the Broom and Brush Factory in February of 1947. As with the people they protected, however, some members of the network were not so lucky. Werner Schaff, for example, was arrested in October of 1944, interrogated, and ultimately executed by firing squad on March 16, 1945. Otto and Elsie Weidt survived the war and together founded an orphanage and retirement home for Jewish Holocaust victims in Berlin. Sadly, Otto died just 2 years later on December the 22nd, 1947, succumbing to heart failure at the age of 64. Elsie Weidt took over management of the Broom and Brush Factory, which operated until 1952 when it was dissolved by the East Berlin Magistrate. In 1958, as part of an initiative by West Berlin Interior Senator Joachim Lipschitz, Elsie Weidt was recognized as an unsung hero of Berlin and awarded a monthly pension of 50 Deutschmarks. She died on June 8, 1974 at the age of 71. 3 years earlier, on September 7, 1971, her late husband was honored posthumously as righteous among the nations by the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Institute in Israel. This honor was made possible by the testimonies of the people whose lives he saved during the war, including Alice Licht, who in October of 1962 wrote a letter telling the Yad Vashem, "One of these people was Otto Weidt, an upright and noble-minded character, fearless and a fighter for justice, selfless and inspired only by one wish, to help the poor, suffering, and persecuted, and to lighten each of their loads." Similarly, thanks to efforts of former Broom and Brush Factory employee Inga Deutschkron, who later became a journalist, a square near Berlin's central train station was named in honor of Otto Weidt in 2018. And today, the former Broom and Brush Factory he operates a museum dedicated to Weidt's life and heroism. Other members of Weidt's underground network were similarly honored. In 1959, the Berlin Senate recognized Theodor Gorner as an unsung hero, while in 1967 he was named Righteous Among the Nations, as was Carl Deibel in 2014. Others, however, received no such recognition, including Gustav Kremet and Hedwig Portius, who, due to her history as a sex worker, was condemned as morally degenerate by the post-war German authorities. She died in poverty in 1977. Going back to Otto Weidt, thanks to his tireless and and heroic efforts, he succeeded in saving 30 of his employees from Nazi persecution, most of whom went on to live long, happy lives. But while this number may seem insignificant next to the over 1,000 Jews saved by Oskar Schindler and the some 6 million exterminated in the Holocaust, as Itzhak Stern, played by Ben Kingsley, memorably states in Schindler's List, "He who saves one life saves the world entire." So hope you found this video maybe not enjoyable, but at least very interesting. If you did, please click subscribe to help make sure YouTube shows you other interesting videos we've done. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.